Good morning. It's fantastic to see so many of you here. I know we've got many people that have joined us online as well, probably more than are in the room, but those of you who are here, I hope you enjoyed the breakfast. If you're online, sorry, it was delicious. I'm Claire Tunley. I'm the Chief Exec at the Financial Services Skills Commission. I'm thrilled to welcome you here today. I do have to do a couple of housekeeping things first. We aren't expecting a fire alarm. If one does go off, we exit and follow the staff who will tell us where to go. Just to remind people, we are recording the session. Lots of people want to hear what we're going to say and they want to be able to look at it later. So we are recording it. Just be aware of that. But as I said, I'm delighted to welcome you here with Standard Chartered and the Commission for this event on menopause in the workplace. When we set up the Commission 3 years ago, our work is around making sure the sector, the financial services sector in the UK, has the talent and skills it needs to succeed. And part of that is thinking about who is in our workplace. How do we retain that talent and support that talent? It's not just about recruitment, it's very much about our existing workforce. And if we look forward 3 years from when we started, we now have 38 members in our commission. That's representing over a third of the UK's financial services workforce, over 300,000 workers across insurance, banking, asset management, fintech. I'm extremely proud of the work that we've been doing to date, but extremely proud of this piece that we've done with Standard Chartered in particular. When Tanuj and I had a lunch and a chat a few years ago, it came up as a conversation. We both knew women that have made choices about their career and how they worked because of the menopause. And as we were talking, we said, there's something going on here. There's something bigger. If we both know these stories, this is something we need to look at. So we kicked off the research that was published back in 2021, which identified that 128,000 women working in financial services in the UK are between the ages of 45 and 55. Very likely to be transitioning through the menopause at that moment. Not all, some go earlier, of course. That was one of the key wake-up moments from our research that we undertook that year, as well as the other findings. Then we published that research with lots of recommendations about how employers can support their staff with the menopause transition. And then we followed up that work last summer to find out how firms were implementing some of those recommendations, what was actually going on. And we've been really, really overwhelmed by the response that we've had of interest, of conversations, of questions, of discussion. It really has opened up the conversation. And one of our aims that Tanuj and I set out was to break the taboo, to mention the word menopause, mention the M word, say it as many times as you can today. So it's our responsibility collectively as an industry to really break this taboo and support women on their journey. So I'm delighted we've got some really great speakers today, our panellists from our member firms and from other firms, to talk about how they're supporting. And it's about learning from each other. No one's a winner in this unless we all do it together. So I'm going to move on. First of all, I'm delighted to welcome Carolyn Harris, MP for Swansea East and Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Menopause. Thank you.
I'd like to thank my mother and my... Well, look at me, a dinner lady from Swansea, addressing the financial sector. Are you a dinner lady or... Swansea, see? No, always rely on the girls. We probably dance around the handbag sometime together. Right, well, menopause. Rolls off the tongue, doesn't it, menopause? Now, we say it as if we have so much assurance that we know everything. But think back to the time, and I think back to the time of my mum. My mother never had a menopause. She did, but she never knew she had a menopause. And I think back to my gran. She certainly never had a menopause. She did. I remember it well. But, you know, and not that much has changed. So whilst we talk about it now, while we have this assurity to say the word and it rolls off the tongue, so few people actually know about the menopause. There are 13 million menopausal women in the UK now. Do you know how many of them are actually diagnosed and having treatment? 14%, 1/4. And I will guarantee you that the majority of that 14% are women who've paid private to get a diagnosis and to get the prescription. And I would have been, I mean, my politics would say that I should be embarrassed to say I'm one of those women who went private. But if I give you a little bit of my story, you'll understand why I ended up going private. So to really understand my story, which is in parts very different to other people, but generally not. The ignorance, the total disbelief, the just total lack of knowledge of information about what was happening in my body and in my world. In 1989, when I was a barmaid, I lost my son Martin in a road accident, and he was 8 at the time. So after I lost Martin, there was quite a few years when my husband used to tell me when to wash, when to cook, when to go through the door. I just did not exist. And I came out from that period deciding that I could either sink to the deepest of depths and wallow, or I could try to turn that negativity into something constructive and positive. And I chose to do the positive route. So when I was 34, I went to university. So I went from being a dinner lady and a barmaid to suddenly being a full-time student in Swansea Uni as a mature student. I didn't do the drink and the drugs or the sex, but I was too tired. But I did. But I did do the studying, and all the time I was in university, I kept thinking that somebody was going to tap me on the shoulder and say, "You shouldn't be here. Why are you here?" I was a working class girl. I thought I was daft as a brush, and I never, ever, ever thought that I'd get to university. So you roll that on. I went to work in the charity sector. I worked with Children's Cancer Charity. I worked with capacity building organisations. I worked with young people who are on the brink of offending or taking drugs or school offenders. And what I was doing, I was constantly working. So whilst I was working, I wasn't thinking about what I'd gone through, and I wasn't really taking hold of my grief. In 2001, after I finished university and actually got a job for the first time, which actually paid me something we could afford to live on, I got pregnant again. And then 2 years later, I was pregnant again. The last pregnancy was an ectopic pregnancy. So from 2003 to 2010, I did not have a regular cycle. My periods were not in any way normal, which a lot of women in this room and outside would understand. You could never really, when I was younger, I could set my watch by my periods, but I'd reached that point in my life where I may have one, I may not have one, and that's how it was. So in 2010, I bled for 7 months, and to say it was horrendous doesn't even go there. And I eventually ended up going to my GP because my friend had said to me she was going away on holiday. She said, "I'll be back in a fortnight if you're still alive when I get back." And I said, "What do you mean if I'm still alive?" She said, "Have you seen yourself? Have you looked in the mirror? You look close to death." So I phoned my GP. I went immediately down to see him. He sent me immediately to the hospital. He took the blood. I took it into the hospital, handed it in, and before we'd even reached my house, they were on the phone saying, "We need you to come in urgently." I went in, I walked into the ward, and the nurse said, "You're the woman who's the walking dead." I had a haemoglobin of 4. I was completely and utterly at the lowest physical point that I could be. They couldn't even do any investigation as to why I was in that position until they'd give me, I think it was 3 pints of blood and 1 pint of iron, but it might have been 4 pints. Over 48 hours, I was just hooked up to machines and they were pumping stuff into me. Eventually, they managed to get me into theatre, and I had massive fibroids. So when people talk about my last period, I don't know. Because I don't know when the fibroid started bleeding and the period stopped. I have no idea. So I couldn't tell you when I started my menopausal journey. All I know is when I came out of hospital, I sank into a deep, deep depression. And I talk about this a lot, but I lived in a pink anorak with a fur hood. And I lived in my living room in this pink anorak, and I didn't go anywhere. I could actually see myself now going into Farm Foods, because that was the quietest shop there was locally, and somebody would look at me and I'd leave my trolley and I'd walk back out. My friend, who was with me throughout this, she tried everything to try to get me to be me, because I am not the kind of person who is shy, retiring, quiet. I tend to fill a room because I'm so gobby. But at this particular point in time, and in the beginning, I think my husband thought, "Oh, Eureka, we can have a conversation without her shouting at me." But that didn't last long before I just wallowed and wallowed and wallowed. And I decided that because I hadn't allowed myself to stop and grieve and really absorb what a huge, huge situation I was in, having lost my son, that I was now grieving. And I totally convinced myself of that. I was having a nervous breakdown. I went to my GP and I convinced my GP I was having a nervous breakdown. So I ended up on antidepressants. In the very early days, I ended up on antidepressants and diazepam and occasionally Valium, just to try to regulate how I was feeling, because I was just completely a wreck. After about 5 or 6 months, I remember sitting in my living room and realising that I'd been off on the sick, as we call it, for that point where you're going to tip over into half pay. And in a space of 30 seconds, I went from, oh, I'm going to go on half pay next month, to I'm going on no pay, I'm going to be sacked, the mortgage isn't going to be paid, the house is going to be repossessed, David's going to leave me, the car's going to be taken away, and my kids are going to be taken into care. And in that 30 seconds, nothing or no one would have ever convinced me that what I was thinking wasn't going to come true. You know, people say the glass is half empty. For me at that time, the glass was dry. There was nothing in it. There was nothing in life that was anything other than trauma and tragedy and black. And if I thought it was going to happen. It's a horrible, horrible situation. I went back to work because I couldn't afford not to. So I went back to work and probably limped through life for the next, certainly for the next 6 years, I limped through life. Now, during that time, I actually got selected as a candidate for the general election in 2015, and I actually got elected. And I even successfully managed to get some legislation through, which I'm going to say is very rare for an opposition MP, and I've got 4 pieces of legislation to my name. But that just goes to show that my personality is that I get things done and I don't give up until I do. So to think about me in that position, it makes it even more extreme how awful I was. I got elected, but I only worked. I didn't live, I just worked. I'd come up with all the excuses under the sun. I wouldn't go on holiday because, I was in London all week, so why would I want to go on holiday when I wanted to spend time at home with my family? Oh no, I can't go on a plane. I can't go on a plane anymore. I don't like flying. Oh no, I can't go to the cinema tonight. I got a really early meeting in the morning, and that's how I went through life. Being up in London Monday to Thursday, going home Thursday night, doing what I had to do in the constituency. The only thing I could actually do was work. I had no energy. I had no stamina. My enthusiasm was what I was trying to do in work. Once I come out to work, then I just fizzle down and I would just be absolutely exhausted. And around this time, I'd started meeting women who were trying to get a platform for their specific menopause asks. Very much working in silos, all brilliant women, and every campaigning woman out there or man who campaigns on the menopause have my full credit for getting this issue to where it is now. But there wasn't anyone doing the big picture. There wasn't anyone doing the joined up stuff. Everybody was looking at a specific thing that they thought would solve the problem. And I began to think, just before we went into COVID, that what we needed was something a little bit more ambitious, where we looked at the whole thing. And we actually we raised awareness of the whole thing. And we weren't just looking at one aspect of posters in GP surgeries, raising awareness for women there, or requesting that doctors get better training. These were all fantastic things, but they were all standalone. And these women would come into work and we'd give them a platform. We'd have them with these lovely placard things, and we'd have MPs to come along, have a photograph taken, go on their social media, we'd retweet it, lovely, maybe a little bit in the press, and off they'd go. And we also started talking about it in the House of Commons chamber. It was by now we had International Menopause Day. And I remember the first debate we done on it in the chamber when I was there, and it was really interesting. And I was being a good sister, and I was talking about everybody else's menopause. And I was saying how I wanted to make sure that everyone who was suffering had equality, and that we were doing the right thing, and that we would have the right policies in workplaces, and that we would make sure. But I didn't have a menopause, you see, because I'd sailed through it. Mine had come and gone without me even noticing it. And I was having these conversations with women, and all of a sudden, and it literally was a light bulb moment, they were telling me about how they were aching, their knees were sore, their hands were sore. And I think, when I get up off a chair, I say things like, oh, God, age don't come alone, do it? When I'm climbing up the stairs to go to the bathroom or to go to bed, I get halfway and I think, oh, God, I'm knackered. I think about the fact that I'd have to lay in a dark room sometimes because I had terrible migraines and that my skin would be itching. And there were occasions when I felt so hot, I felt physically sick, as if I had like a motion sickness. And I thought about how, even though I was on antidepressants, I was never the same person as I was in my 20s and 30s when I didn't have this awful anxiety and this awful catastrophizing. And all of a sudden I realised that despite the fact that I was an MP, despite the fact that I'd had a late university education, I was menopausal, and I did not know I was menopausal. And since then, the number of women and the number of men in really highly qualified professions who've asked me, and I'll give you one example of a paediatrician who came on to me in a public toilet, give me her symptoms and said, do you think I'm menopausal? And I said, well, I'm a fully qualified dinner lady and barmaid. I'm going to say yes, but you should know. And then that really highlighted to me, if we've got ignorance within the medical profession about being able to identify what the menopause is, how on earth are the rest of us meant to be able to say, I'm menopausal? So, 2 years passed and I've embraced my menopause, but I've done nothing about it. And somebody said to me one day, well, doesn't the HRT help? I said, I can't go on HRT. By then I was 60. I'm 60, I can't go on HRT. And they said, look, I think you maybe need to go and find out. So I made a private appointment. I saw a doctor. And from the moment I knew that I had a prescription of HRT on its way, call it the placebo effect, but from the moment I knew that I had taken control of my menopause and I was now doing something about it, I was transformed. I was a completely different person. I was my old self. And I started taking HRT last July. I'm lucky because I went private and I can actually afford to pay for testosterone, which most women, well, they won't get it from the NHS unless you can make a link between your sexual health and your mental health. Because the only thing that is testosterone is being recognised as being able to tackle is sexual health problems. It doesn't look at the fact that we know from the studies in America that it helps prevent the same symptoms as dementia. It helps stop the brain fog. It helps with your physical well-being. It helps with everything. So many women who I speak to who are on HRT, they say to me, well, I'm on HRT, but there's something not quite right. And I know that there's something not quite right is they're missing the third link. Because if your body loses 3 hormones and you're only replacing 2, you're not actually putting yourself in a rebalanced state. But that's something we're working on to get testosterone through the NICE guidelines, to get it on to the ability to have it on prescription. And hopefully, it's a long road, but hopefully we'll get there. What I ask the government to do is I ask the government to recognise that fantastic organisations like yours have recognised the need to put into place practices that support their workforce. You will not keep talented women, you will not attract talented women unless you recognise that the menopause is preventing them feeling that they are worthy of the jobs they have, and certainly that they should go for promotion. 1 in 4 women reduce their hours, 1 in 10 women walk away from work. You think about the financial implications of that. You think you make decisions now economically based on what you're earning today. In 5 years' time, the menopause has hit you, you've got no support in work, you walk away from your job. A lot of women, especially those who are on low income, are going to end up on long-term sickness benefit. Those women will not pay full national insurance contributions. So by the time they qualify for the state pension, they'll have a reduced pension, which means they will qualify for pension credit. Women, the numbers of divorces of women who are menopausal is a lot higher than at any other time. Women make decisions during divorce cases based on their current salary. Some, for example, may decide that they will buy their partner out of the property. So they take a mortgage today based on what they're earning today. 5 years' time, they can't work anymore because they're not working for a company which actually protects them during the menopause. They then can't afford to pay the mortgage. So they will end up on a benefit where the interest on their mortgage is then being paid by the state. But we talk about keeping people in work over 50. To do that, we have to put the right policies and the right procedures in to keep women in work. Men whose wives are menopausal, if I've been up all night and I've been laying next to my husband, I'm sweating profusely, I'm kicking, and he's not had a good night's sleep. He's got to come into work and try to rationalise, what the hell happened last night. I may have been aggressive because the mood swings. Women during so domestic violence increases during the menopause. Women who are refusing their partner's sex, let's be honest about it, can potentially become victims. Women who have been victims will have that red mist come down and suddenly retaliate. I can think of one very notable murder trial where the lady was in prison for life for murdering her husband she'd been a victim of controlling and coercive behaviour forever. She hit her 50s. He started giving her verbal abuse. She grabbed a hammer and she beat him to death. She ended up serving life, but that did get reduced to manslaughter, and she walked out to the court on the day of her appeal because she had a reduced sentence to manslaughter for 8 years, but she'd been in prison for 8 years. Think about women in prison. Some women are in prison because they made bad decisions which led them into the criminal justice system. Some women in prison are going through the menopause. They've not even got clean clothes to change into. They haven't even got clean sheets they can change. They are sleeping on rubber mattresses. They are locked in cells where they bang in the doors and being thought of as having behaviour or mental health issues. They're having days added to their sentence. Think of the businesses that are losing women. Businesses who cannot afford or do not need to lose really vital experience, talent and loyalty. And they are suffering. What my job now is we've got the menopause to the place where people are now talking about the menopause. I don't think the day goes by when somebody on some newspaper or TV channel or radio show doesn't mention the menopause. God knows, I think I do an interview at least once a day on the menopause. Sometimes, and you probably relate to this, sometimes I get asked questions and I want to say, oh, for God's sake, did you hear what I said yesterday? Because I'm like so frustrated that you're asking me the same questions that I answered last week. Listen to what I've said. But then I realised that they're probably just trying to amplify the message. And we can talk about it, but we've got to stop talking and start acting. We've got to be proactive. When companies like yours do something proactive about the menopause, it encourages your clients. It encourages SMEs. It encourages other organisations to think, well, if they're doing something, we need to think about upping our game because we could end up losing talent to them. Make it a competition. Make it that you have the best. Because if you have the best, you are doing the best for the people in your employment. So many companies are starting to realise it, but there will always be some. I had an email the other day, and the guy said he was an employer, and if I was successful in getting companies to introduce menopause policies, he wasn't going to employ older women or young girls because they got pregnant. We've got to change those attitudes. And if we don't change them as people in a position to use our platform to change them, then the government needs to do it. The government needs to step up. I mean, there is a hesitancy, but I'm not going to go there because I'll be political and I'll swear and then I'll get into trouble. But anyway, I used HRT as a poster girl. And before I used HRT as a poster girl, like I said, I wasn't on it, so I never even give a consideration. But I had a private members bill about 2021, and Joe and I desperately thought, what was I going to use my private members bill for? Because I wanted it to be menopause related. And we thought of all the things that I'd like to happen, but none of that could have happened in a short space of time. It had to be something that we could be deliverable in a year. So I asked the government if they would give women in England parity with women in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, which is free HRT. In reality, in the devolved nations, you don't pay for any prescriptions. But I sort of framed it that women in England were the only ones who were paying for HRT. And I didn't have success in making it free because the government said there were other conditions where prescriptions were not free, and they didn't want to open a can of worms with everyone started coming and campaigning for free prescriptions. God forbid you should have free prescriptions. But anyway, what I did manage to do was to talk them into issuing a once a year prescription for HRT. So the first time you go to your GP, you pay £18.70, or the pharmacist, and then you get a slip or something on a computer. I don't know how they've done it. It's been a big bone of contention to me because it's taken them 20 months to actually work out how to do it. I probably could have done it in 20 minutes on the back of a fag paper, but there we are. And from April the 1st, women will only pay once a year for the HRT, which is a landmark victory, and I'm going to take it as that. But it wasn't about the HRT, it was about the awareness raising. It was about making sure people are talking about HRT. People are now saying, oh, what's HRT for? Oh, yeah, for the menopause. Bang, we've got it. People are talking about the menopause. It's 2023. I keep saying 2022. It's 2023. We are 51% of the population. Why is it only now that we are asking and getting normality? Because we don't want special treatment. We just want to feel normal. We just want to be able to contribute to society. We just want to be able to be productive. We just want to feel that we are worthy, we're worth being here, we're important, and we want to live a life. That's all we're asking for. So thank you to everyone for all you do, because without you amplifying the message, my job would be a lot harder. And you've all got a platform. You've got clients, you've got friends, you've got sports clubs you take your kids to, anywhere you can go and talk about menopause, please talk about it, because currently it's women helping women. It's women diagnosing other women. In some cases, it's men diagnosing other women. When I talk about testosterone, there's usually at least one bloke in the room who comes up to me quietly and says, where does the wife get that from then? But that's fine. And interestingly enough, the best questions are usually from men. So I think men are interested, and that's the big thing that people always say to me, oh, how are you going to get men interested? Of course men are interested. It may be 51% of the population who personally feel it, but it affects 100% of the population. But if you live in with anyone, or you know anyone, or you employ anyone, or you care about a woman who's going through the menopause, because they're going to get there, and believe me, these women who say I sail through it, you stop and ask them the questions about the over 40 symptoms there are. And I bet every one of them says, oh, I got that, oh, I got that. And none of them realise they're menopausal. So all of us can be sisters today, and we can all work for women, because we are wonderful. Help us stay wonderful. Thank you.
Wow, how do you follow that? Huge thank you to Carolyn for being so open, so honest, but also for being such a great champion for the cause across all the aspects of menopause. We're talking about one element here today, about how employers can support their employees, but I think, across the whole conversation, you certainly pop up in my news feed on LinkedIn and in newspapers a lot. So yeah, thank you, and keep going. I think it just brings back that there's so much going on in lives. There's as a woman in her 40s with children and parents who are getting more and more frail, there's so much going on. I'm like, I'm tired, but I'm always tired. Is that to do with menopause? Is that something else? And just trying to unpick all of that, notice that, do the health admin associated with getting a GP appointment and everything. It's easy to lose that in our day-to-day lives. I think work is such a big part of our lives. It's so important. We spend a lot of our time at work, and actually being able to navigate that and be ourselves at work, perform at work. We know that women want to perform is huge. And so this is the focus of the work that we've done about supporting women as an employer. And I'd now like to hand over to Katarina Earhart, who's the Policy and Research Manager at the Commission. She's led the research aspect of our work along with Standard Chartered, and is going to take us through some of the key findings from the work we've done to date. Thanks.
I'm really glad to be here to be presenting the findings of our research, as Claire has mentioned. Before I start, I'll say a few words about how we've gathered the data. So as you know, our initial report was published in October 2021, and that was based on really extensive research. We surveyed over 2,400 men and women. That also included some trans men undergoing the menopause. And we've also led focus groups and interviews. A year later, we did our follow-up survey, and we were glad that 81 firms participated in the survey, and those were firms from all across the financial services industry, banks, insurers, asset managers, and many more. And together, those employers who participated in the survey represent a workforce of over 200,000 employees, or almost 20% of the financial services workforce. I will now say a little bit more about the key findings. And our first big finding really was that the impact of the menopause is hidden. And we've just heard a lot about that. That there are two main reasons. The first one is that there is a culture of silence. As you can see, 8 out of 10 women don't disclose their menopause status, and that's often because they're afraid of negative consequences. Our research has shown that menopausal women are the employee group which is the least likely to feel able to talk to their managers about any concerns they might have, whether health-related or other work-related concerns. In contrast, young men are the most likely to feel comfortable to bring up any concerns. And then the second reason, as we just heard, that the reason that the impact of the menopause is hidden is because it's so often misunderstood and because the symptoms vary so much from individual to individual. And as you can see, our data did show that sleep issues are really widespread, anxiety is really widespread, and many others. And I've included on the slides the case of a former manager in banking who was struggling with symptoms and who felt they had to leave their role and step down. And they were left wondering whether with more support, could they have stayed in that role? And I think that really illustrates how the sector is losing talent. And I'll say a little bit more about that with some stats. What's really stood out for us from our research is that almost half of the women experiencing the menopause said they felt more likely they would not want to opt for a promotion. So it's really made them less likely to apply for a promotion if one was available. And at the same time, that doesn't mean that women aren't ambitious, because the data also showed that if you look at senior women and men, so in the same age group, senior women of menopausal age are actually more likely to say they're interested in going for a promotion. So we really should think about how can we support them. And this impacts the female pipeline for leadership a lot. But it's not just about women opting out of promotions, it's also about women opting out of work altogether. And a quarter of the women currently experiencing the menopause in our survey said that their experiences made them more likely to leave the work before retirement. And at a sector level, that could mean up to 30,000 workers just leaving our industry, which would have a huge impact on any of these individual women, but it really would constrain the talent pipeline for individual firms in our sector. Now, the question is, how can we support menopausal employees better. And our research has identified a few measures. The good news is that offering support around the menopause doesn't have to be difficult, and it doesn't have to be costly. The recommendations we've gathered fall into 3 areas. Culture training and awareness is a big one, but it's also about workplace flexibility, flexible working arrangements, and the workplace environment. And from our follow-up survey that we conducted between July and September last year, we've gathered a bit of data to understand where our industry is at. So firstly, looking at raising awareness, I think we've just heard just how important that is. Because opening up the conversation around difficult issues can make the workplace more inclusive for everyone. And that can be beneficial in the same way as opening up the conversation around mental health has been. And that's something women have told us. Senior leaders obviously play a really important role when it comes to awareness raising. And we were really glad to see that in 51% of our firms, senior leaders are already supporting initiatives around the menopause. And a further 35% are planning to start doing so in the next year, so currently. I think that really shows just how much has happened and how much more is happening, and we're glad to be supporting that. We've also heard encouragingly from examples where male managers whose wives were going through the menopause were clued up on the issues and they were able to support their employees. So that's a really great case study. I've heard about firms introducing menopause policies, and we will hear a lot more on the panel later. A few notes on flexible working arrangements. Obviously, flexibility has been around for some time, and a lot was already in place before the pandemic. The pandemic has further embedded positive shifts. So as our data shows, almost 80% of firms were already offering part-time work as an option. And that has further increased. There are many other ways in which firms can use flexibility to support employees who would like to work in a more flexible way. Lastly, on workplace environment, it's obvious that changes in physical infrastructure can help menopausal employees, and there are other ways in which the environment can be made more supportive. Many firms have employee assistance programs, and we were really pleased to see that 13% of firms participating in our survey had either newly introduced or had strengthened coverage for the menopause in their existing employee assistance program. These are just a few of the findings. There's a lot more in our research which you can find on our website. I'm also around today or after today for any questions you might have, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about this from the panel.
So welcome my panelists. Do I have one more?
Thank you so much. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, Claire, here we go. Thank you, Katerina. And before you leave, Caroline.
Getting a round of applause. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for your compelling and poignant story and for your leadership in that space. So just first of all, a quick welcome to all of you. It's so nice to see so many of you on the day of strike, and it's lovely to see a few men in the room as well. I'm Sophie Lambin. I will be the moderator of this panel today. I think we are joined as well by our panelists online, so welcome to you, and welcome as well to our audience online. We'll have a panel and then we have a Q&A, so please make good note of your questions, and our online participants, we are also recording your questions and I will be receiving them. So my name is Sophie Lambin. I'm the CEO of Kite Insight and of the Climate School, and I'm delighted to be moderating this session today. So clearly, open dialogue on menopause is definitely not a panel I expected to moderate early days in my career, 30 years ago. So it's first of all, I think, wonderful to see and acknowledge such progress, and thank you for your leadership in bringing this to the fore. At the same time, we've heard as well that there's still much room for improvement. And I think, the case is really strong to consider supporting women through menopause transition as a business imperative not only to enable women's ongoing participation in the economy, but for me is also to think about the importance of benefiting from their leadership in workplace, in communities, in societies, which is often at the peak of their career. And we know that getting to that point is not necessarily a straight journey either. And I love what Caroline just said, consider it as a competitive advantage, as we heard that the risk of losing talent, the vital energy, experience of women is real. And when you think as well, for me, I often think about the challenge we face as a society, more polarized than ever, as an economy, as a planet even. That leadership is so critical. Women are known to be early adopters of, early at recognizing the need for transformation, and their leadership in driving inclusive outcome in this context is particularly critical, particularly when we think about the transformation that industries are going for a green economy. So this seminal research by Standard Chartered and FSSC is truly revealing, and I think paving the way for very compelling data, but also opportunities for change. So building on the findings that Katerina shared, we are now going to discuss some of the concrete opportunities for employers to take action. So we have a fantastic panel today that will help us illustrate some of the ways in which companies can support employees. And without doing an extensive introduction, I'm just going to introduce each of you. I will ask each panelist, when I ask you the first question, to say a few words about yourself. But to my left here, Claire, who introduced the session earlier today, who is the CEO of the Financial Service Skills Commission. Tanuj Kapilash Rami, Group Head of Human Resource and Standard Chartered, and one of the obviously leading this force behind this research. Christopher Pitt, hello Christopher, CEO of First Direct. Vicky Wallis, Chief People Officer of Direct Line Group. And Tamar Hugh, Group Head Talent Development and Inclusion at Phoenix Group. Welcome to all of you, and maybe a welcome from the audience as well. Thank you. So maybe Claire, I'll start with you. Maybe you can, having sort of led that research, you can tell us your perspective on what were for you the sort of the aha moments from the research. Is progress being made? What has surprised you, interested you since the research has been done?
Sure. And it has only been 15 months since we published the initial research. And it does feel like so much has happened. And I can relate to what Carolyn was saying, that people start talking to you about the menopause. So, I play netball with another bunch of mums. It's not very competitive. It's not high level, but it's really great. And saying, what about the menopause? What do you think? And I was like, I don't know. I've just done some research, but it just opened up to me about how little we talk about this. But things have moved on hugely. There's so much action from firms, from different groups around that are all working on this topic. I think, there's many of our member firms at the Commission that are progressing on this. There was news I read last night about HSBC and different uniforms that you can now wear jumpsuits and jeans, which sounds fantastic. So there has been a lot of action. I think for me, it's just the conversation, being able to talk about the word menopause and say it out loud in a forum like this. And I spoke at a dinner last year and actually spoke about it, and hundreds of people in the room, and it wasn't like everyone suddenly went, "Ooh, she lost the plot." They were interested to hear about the issues. So I think part of that is what's changed. And I think we'll hear more about the work that firms are putting in place. So leaders talking about this. We'll hear from Chris, as a CEO, how he's talking about this, but just putting it on the agenda and then thinking about some of the practical support. It's not just uniforms. It can just be about being able to talk to your manager about it, or having work flexibility. I think the pandemic has helped that a lot, about being able to work in different ways, which perhaps wasn't there before. So it is moving on massively. I'm really taken aback at how this is really being caught as a topic for discussion.
Great, thank you. Tanuj, how is this trend playing out in your views, and what are you doing at Standard Chartered?
So look, thanks, Sophie. First, thank you to everyone for coming and taking part in this event. The conversation that Claire and I had, 18 months ago over lunch, all best ideas come from food, especially wine is involved, even though we did not have wine that lunch, Claire.
We should have done.
But we should have. But it actually came out as, we talk a lot about, we are 45% women in our global workforce, which is we have 86,000 colleagues in 53 markets, 45% of them are women. We've set very ambitious targets of female representation at senior levels. So, we've said by the end of next year, we'll have 35% women at our senior most levels. It's all fine. We've all had these targets for a while. Everyone's tracking and reporting. But we are beginning to have a lot of conversations, which is how the lunch started, about, so where do we take this next? So, we've obviously spoken about sort of recruitment, talent management, mentoring, sponsorship. But what are the real blockers that are coming in the way of female growing in the leadership pipeline of firms? And both of us had experiences of colleagues. I'd had experiences of colleagues in Stanchart, very senior female colleagues who'd had conversations with me about their own experience on menopause and how many of them came very, very close to taking a decision to get off a full-time corporate job. Interestingly, that coincided with that 45 to 55 year age group, which is when we are trying to meet our 35% target of women in the senior most positions. So that's how the research came about. For us, I was staggered by some of the numbers in the research. And for those of you who have not read the full report, please do. It's on both on SC.com and the Skills Commission website. But for me, the most staggering was 1 in 4 women are actively thinking of getting off full-time work when they're going through menopause. And they, Katharina shared the number around people who are not going to apply for promotion. So for me, it really started off as a massive talent play. And, how do we ensure that we continue to have the right talent play in the company and women in leadership roles? So the results came out. There are a couple of things we did. I put our actions in 3 buckets. The first one is breaking the taboo around this topic, breaking the culture of silence. We released very early on a menopause guide, which went to all people leaders. And I will say, we've got a lot of my male colleagues in the room, many of them online. The number of male leaders who wrote to me when the guide was launched to say thank you, because what it did was it provided a structure to be able to have a conversation on this topic. And I do believe it's an issue, and Caroline spoke about it so well, it's an issue for everyone. And a lot of our male leaders said, either at the workplace, it gave us an opportunity to talk about this topic, and many there said, it actually makes me better equipped to be a partner or a father or a brother or a son. And actually the feedback we had from male colleagues on the menopause guide was phenomenal. So the first bucket was education, awareness, opening up the conversation. The second bucket for us were workplace adjustments. I think it's important. I was very, very pleased to see what HSBC has done. We did spare uniforms, providing sanitary products in all of our sort of premises and offices very early on. I think that's quite important. Being able to create opportunities for female colleagues to be able to adjust temperature in workplace. So all of the workplace adjustment policy was, for me, the second bucket. The third bucket for us, which, we have spoken about quite openly, is the whole space around flexible working. How do we make flexible working as an opportunity to drive true inclusion? And that's not just for women, it's for men, women, generational diversity. And we did the piece around flexible working in a big way. I said it started off for me as being a talent leadership play, but what I wasn't expecting and the massive outcome was the impact this had on driving up inclusion more broadly across the work. And I love, Katrina, you picked that up in your comment. Our scores on psychological safety. Do I feel it is safe to speak up in the company? Do I believe it's a culture which is inclusive? Our scores on psychological safety have gone up significantly year on year, but especially in the last 18 months, as measured by our employee survey. Do I believe it's only because of the work that we've done on menopause? No, but I firmly believe that, us embracing and leading on this topic and speaking about it very openly contributed massively to creating that broader culture of inclusion. And that, for me, was the positive, unintended consequence of this work.
That's great. And it's one of those taboo that was not previously talked about. So probably had, as you say, ripple effect. And I love what you said about men, in a way authorizing men to have those discussions and not, falling back on this huge effort you have made to bring women to a position of leadership and then than them not talking the next promotion. So, Chris, if I can turn to you now, if you could speak to us a little bit about, workplace culture and how business can tackle what probably is still some of the entrenched bias and taboo around menopause. And if I can slip in, thank you for your leadership on that issue.
No problem. Thanks, Sophie. It's been a great conversation debate already, so I won't kind of add to some of the things that have already been said. I think if I kind of go through the line of logic as to why we've got so much behind this in FD, and clearly we're part of HSBC as well, so very proud to be part of the wider group within the UK, and then some of the things that we've done. FD famously, we're based in working class Leeds and working class Glasgow. We, in the late 1980s, when we launched, had a creche. And that was for the huge number of primarily women who, to allow them to come to work and give them that flexibility, they could have the creche on site, and we still have that. The tenure of our people, vast majority of our people answer the phones, has now matured into a period where a lot of them are going through the menopause, and therefore it becomes an issue for them, and shows for us that not only about the mechanic that was talked to by Katharina in terms of the number of people impacted by the menopause, but it allows us to recruit and retain those people. But more importantly, I think for me, it shows that we care about them. We care about what matters to them. So it does have a rational benefit to the organisation, but it's just the right thing to do as well. I'll talk to kind of 6 headings, some of which have been talked already. One is, I think the first one is the environment, creating an environment where the menopause isn't a word that isn't mentioned, and then the symptoms around the menopause are not hidden. So by me talking about it, it allows people to mail me and say, I can't come to this meeting today because I'm feeling a sense of anxiety, or I'm sorry, in that meeting before I couldn't say anything because I had a complete brain fog. And it doesn't become something that can't be talked about. I think talk is cheap though, and you do need to turn it into action. So some of the things that we've done, and they're building off the great work that Standard Chartered have done as well. We've got 75 advocates within HSBC FD and 50 champions for the menopause. You create an infrastructure of advocates that's a constant conversation around the menopause, rather than something is done by senior leadership and then kind of we move on to the next issue, or it then comes around every quarter. You then got to create an infrastructure. So we have lunch and learns where, again, there's conversations around the impact of anxiety, brain fog, fitness, and some of even the more taboo issues around the menopause we're calling out. Again, there's the constancy. So you've got the people as advocates, and then you've got the infrastructure behind it. Education. So we've got Meno hubs within HSBC FD. I think the thing I like most about what the guys have done with the organisation is, for those of you in the room, we know the financial services industry loves mandatory training. It's kind of part of our DNA. Weaponise mandatory training back against the organisation. So we make mandatory training, menopause awareness for our leaders and for our people, so that the people become aware, and then the managers become part of it as well. And all of us know that fear when we get the email through saying we haven't done our mandatory training. We do that rather than anything else. Process procedures. We love a process and procedure. I've been in this industry 30 odd years. You don't need to say why you need another fan. You don't need to say why you want to order a different uniform. You take away the kind of the step required to kind of some ways justify things. And finally, support. And I think one of the most practical things that we've done and been as most used to people, and people have talked to me about it, is a Bupa helpline, a kind of Meno health line. Recognising that we aren't doctors, and that we have trained doctors and nurses at the end of that line that our people can talk to. So that's the suite of things that we've done and are doing, but there's always more to do.
Thank you, Chris. It's on so many ways, it feels so simple and obvious, but it takes some real intention and leadership to put those in place. And and the fact that you have that infrastructure feels that it's there for the long term. So it's really insightful. I'd love what you say as well about people on the phone feeling that they're being taken care of. I've been a First Direct customer for 20 years, and I do feel that they're taking care of us as well as customers. So it definitely ripples down. So, Vicky, if I can turn to you, from looking at the insurance industry, and maybe it'd be interesting from your point of view, what sort of enabling condition for menopausal women you are conceiving in your industry and trans men. I think it's interesting also to hear Katharina mention that beyond culture and mindset, what can be done as sort of operational structure, even at an investment level?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I just think this piece of research has been fantastic, and the achievement in the last 15 months is phenomenal in terms of getting the conversation alive. So well done to you two, because I just think that is fabulous. And I can feel my heart going, because it's the first time I've probably ever talked about menopause openly in front of a group of people, and was going to share a bit about my own, which is something that I've never done before. And I rehearsed this last night with my son, who is 25, and his girlfriend. And it's the first time I've ever spoken to him about it as well, actually, which was quite an evening. And it was phenomenal in terms of the conversation. So before I talk about insurance, and I will, I promise, I had parts of my menopause were quite challenging, and some experiences that I never thought I was going to have, that I'd had maybe when I was 14, when you get caught you're unawares that something, your period's going to start, and you just weren't in the groove of it quite yet. And you got caught out at that age, but everybody was going through it and you all talked about it. I had that when I was 51 in a really important board meeting. And I had the huge humiliation of having to try and extricate myself from the room. And that was tough. And I wasn't feeling that I could talk about it to very many people. I found my way out. I sorted myself out, and I went to the doctor to find out what I could do to make sure I could control it in the future. But I sat in meetings around that time every month for a few months afterwards thinking, is this going to happen again? Am I really in this meeting fully? Because I'm more worried about that actually than actually the meeting I'm in. And I did have other symptoms as well, but that was probably the most defining one for me in terms of feeling out of control. And the humiliation, actually, and not feeling you could talk to anyone about it. I spoke to my husband. We've always talked openly about those things, but did I talk publicly about it at that point? And that's only 6 years ago. No, I didn't. And now we have the opportunity to talk about it, and I feel I want to share things like that so people can talk about it. So in terms of insurance, I think we're on a par with what the banks are doing. The Association of British Insurers have published a blueprint last year about DE&I. It's quite an ambitious one, similar to some of the banking ambitions around the whole sector of diversity and inclusion. And we are absolutely, as part of Direct Line Group, we are behind that and supporting that very, very publicly. And in terms of what we've done in the organisation, very similar to the things that we've talked about here. So I won't repeat them, but one thing I believe that we've really focused on over the last 4 or 5 years is our culture. And actually, I think that has to be the underpin, because you can put in place policies or guidelines or frameworks, but if the culture's not right, people won't use them. They don't feel they can use them, because there isn't that taboo hasn't really gone away about the wide range of complex conversations organisations need to be having. And we've done a lot over the last few years to really sort of bust those taboos, that any conversation is fine, and we will debate things as an organisation, even the really difficult things that maybe we haven't got answers to. Then we have absolutely put in frameworks for our colleagues, for our people managers, to help them exactly the same as you talked to Nuj about, helping our people managers have the conversation. And then obviously some of the adjustments we've made about flexible working and trying to make the default yes, the answer is yes to flexible working, and some of the facilities that we've changed in our offices as well. The last thing we've probably started to do a bit more is about actually finding some data to track how we're doing. So we are absolutely seeing an uptake in women sharing information on Workday in relation to why they're absent and saying it's menopausal related, and which we're really pleased to see. We have seen that so far 75% of those, and it's still early days, tend to be working more for a female manager than a male manager, but it's early days. We only introduced some of this in the sort of the autumn of last year. So we're really pleased with the progress, but we do think tracking it is going to be important as well.
Can I just very quickly, I know you're going to go to tomorrow, but Vicky, I have to say, when the results got published, Claire and I both independently, without discussing it, called our mums. And we both sort of met later, and we both realized that when we read the report, our first instinct was independently talk to our mother and speak to both our mothers on their experience, and actually be mortified that my mother was not comfortable sharing it with her two daughters. And, you know, we are all incredibly close. So there is something very powerful about giving yourself the permission to have those conversations as well. So just wanted to thank you for sharing that.
That's right.
Yeah, and I was going to say thank you for role modeling that point you're making about culture. And you certainly got our heart beating by sharing that first story of last night's conversation. So thank you. Tamar, you know, I think Phoenix has rolled out some really excellent policies around menopause and older workers. And maybe you can talk to some of the internal challenges you faced and maybe with it advice that you might give senior leaders for overcoming those challenges.
Yeah, certainly will. And thank you for this great conversation today and all of the sharing that's been done. It's great to hear the conversation, having this platform and backed up by such excellent research. So I've got 3 challenges and some ways of overcoming them. I think the first one is of how we make this not just a women's issue. It's really important that this is an everyone conversation, and it's everyone's responsibility to do something about it. So that's the challenge. How do you do that? I think we have to go beyond support groups for women and some of the lovely things that we have got in place to really thinking about how we engage everybody. Really loved what you said, Chris, about, you know, mandating some of the training and using that back to the organisation. You know, how do we take this and make it not just that the managers that are open to this are going to come along to it, but that all managers come along? How do we make it so that all colleagues feel that this is something they should learn about? So we've done lots of the same things that I've heard from the other great organisations here today. Something really powerful has been menopause workshops, you know, really focusing on men and giving them the safe space to talk about it and to understand the experience that they're going through as well. As a partner, we're really noticing just how much, you know, men care, men want to help, men want to support. So I think it's really important that we don't exclude men from the conversation and we make this an everyone conversation. And that is definitely through the way in which we communicate and role model it, and having people like those menopause advocates that also, Chris, you talked about. We have them too. We're really proud that we've got many men who've joined our menopause advocates as a result of the work that we've done to engage them in the conversation. That's the first challenge. I think the second challenge is that this can be seen as an initiative, you know, the thing that we're all bothered about right now. And actually, from all of the data that we've seen, this is a really long-term thing that we've got to talk about. We've got to create better working conditions for people so they can live longer, live better, live healthier, live wealthier lives, and really address some of the societal issues that we have when we see so many women impacting. So how do you make it be more than an initiative? It has to be strategic and multifaceted. You know, we talk about having policies in place, but actually sometimes it's just the small things. So, you know, can you, in your flexible working, can you specifically make a request because of menopause? Is there a drop down when you've been off sick that says because of menopause? Is it just actually embedded into all of the practices, processes, policies right across the board, not just in a standalone menopause piece that's really important to have, that sets the tone, but without the backup of all of the other really important things, it could be seen too much as an initiative. That's the comms channels. That's in the Bupa Health. We've just introduced it into our healthcare. It now just comes as a standard part of Bupa. You can have a menopause consultation. You get a 12-week follow-up. It's something that has instantly received such a great response and feedback because it's becoming embedded in what we offer to people. You don't necessarily need to see that as an addition or something we're doing to help it. It's just part of what we offer. And I think the third challenge is, and this is one that we're really sort of facing to right now, is we've done loads of great things when it comes to menopause. We've really stepped into it. We're really grateful. You know, our chief exec, Andy Briggs, is the age advisor to the government. And there's so much of this work which is in connection with older workers, longer working lives, something that we really care about at the Phoenix Group. But the challenge is that even when you've created greater awareness, when you are beginning to normalise the talking of and sharing of menopause in the workplace, then it doesn't mean that you're done. Because people aren't taking part, there is still marginalised groups, people that don't come and take the support that's there. I'm really interested in this because we've created lots of great resources. We've created lots of great ways in which you can get support, be educated. But how do we really make sure that everyone is really utilising that? So I think advocates are really important. Strategic comms and speaking about this all the time are. But to Vicky's point as well, I think we've got to really start to check and measure, how are the policies and the support being used? Where do we see them showing up? What is the turnover? How are we collecting data on why people are exiting our organisations so that we can really address and keep on addressing the issues that are coming up?
Can I just, on Tamar's point about different groups and maybe marginalised groups, because that was part of the research that we did 15, 18 months ago. And we did look at different groups within the female community and trans men. We didn't have enough data on trans men. There just wasn't enough in the data, so we didn't feel we were able to comment on that. But we did speak to Black women, women of Asian origin, women with disabilities, and we found that those groups suffered the menopause as others did, but had a double challenge really. So Black women very much spoke about how they are really in the spotlight, particularly from a leadership point of view, to perform, and they felt that was a double kind of stress, and they did talk about how much of a pressure that was on them. Women with disabilities spoke about the difficulty of trying to separate symptoms. Is this menopause symptoms? Is this a disability symptom? What's going on here? So I think Tamar just raised a really important point that I didn't want to lose, because there are so much complexity in everyone's story and journey, and I think we heard from Carolyn.
In fact, it's a question I wanted to ask you, Tanuj, because this discussion plays out very differently in different cultures. I'm just wondering, how do we make that an inclusive conversation geographically?
Such a good point, Sophie. And I think building on what Claire has said, ultimately it comes down to the lived experience, and the lived experience of people are very different. So, one of the things you have to realize in the whole area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the intersectionality between the various strands of diversity, which does not get spoken about as much, is massively important, right? So for us, all of the work on menopause was the intersectionality between generations and gender, but equally there is the intersectionality between gender and ethnicity, and those things played out. We have found one of the things that we are doing is looking at minimum standards of support from a medical insurance health perspective across markets, because if you think the challenge is a lot in this part of the world, you go to some of the markets in Asia and Africa that are significantly behind the curve from education, awareness, openness to be able to talk about it. Insurance providers are significantly behind the curve, even in their understanding of this being something. And of course, as we know, in many of the markets, we are an emerging markets bank, many of our markets, the state health systems just don't support it. So for us, actually, contextualizing the conversations within the broad banner of inclusion and celebrating the lived experience of all of our colleagues, because the context could be very different, has been quite important. That said, we have not shied away from talking about menopause very openly, because our point of view is these are topics we need to take a stand. And in some of our markets, we are having to take a stand in a space which is where this is still a massive taboo.
Yeah, and you have some fans. In a word, how has been the receptivity in Asia? Have you noticed a difference in the willingness to engage on this topic?
We have found far greater willingness and much lesser what I call cynicism. Melissa, who has come down from Singapore, she heads D&I for us across Asia. The openness, the real appreciation and willingness to engage with the issue, I have found that even more in markets in Asia from men and from women. And again, if there's one thing I will say is for companies, we do sometimes over-index. The nature of conversations could be slightly different, but these are universal issues where people are very open to have the conversations.
And Claire, thank you for making this point about compounding challenges that some underrepresented group faces. And Tema, thank you for your points. I realize I called you Tama earlier, so forgive my French pronunciation. Chris, one of the points that Tema made is really about advocacy, and I think you've often probably been labelled more than you wish for as a male advocate on this point. Can you tell us a little bit more how you engage with your male peers, and how to include more male leaders in this conversation?
Yeah, my EA actually called me Mr. Menopause for the world era. He's no longer with us, clearly. I must add, it's really, I think, again, it's been mentioned before, this is a whole of society issue. It isn't a female issue, it's a whole of society issue. My wife is 60 this year, and she went through the menopause in 2010. And it was when I had a job when I was travelling away. And every Monday, I used to travel away on a Monday and come home on a Friday. She used to burst into tears on the doorstep. And my wife that's not how a modus operandi. And I thought, I know I'm a wonderful person, but, why are you burst into tears on a Monday? And it only dawned on me when I actually joined First Direct and I actually went to a menopause training session that my wife was going through the menopause there, and really I was completely oblivious to it. I'm a marketeer by training, and kind of empathy. I'd like to think empathy is one of the things I'm reasonably good at, and I'm completely lacking in it. So getting to men, and also we find younger women as well who don't see this as an issue necessarily, that is something that they need to think about, is really important to allow, one, the conversations to have in the workplace and also at home, I think. But also it becomes a caring issue. Do you care? I mean, I was a pretty shockingly bad husband in 2010 because I was, I rang her up later and I said, "Are you all right?" And she said yes, and we just kind of carried on. But I wasn't creating an environment or asking questions or being supportive in a quiet way because I didn't realise what was going on. So I think it is a whole of business issue. And I think somebody mentioned before, and apologies, I can't remember who said that, men-only sessions to allow men who maybe feel slightly nervous about talking about it or thinking about it to engage in the debate. And I'm very conscious this might be my view, but I'd really, it gets on my wick when, men shy away from this. I do think this, and this idea that we've kind of got to wrap it in to kind of train men or engage men, we just got to get over ourselves and get involved. This idea that we need to sell it to people. I think, what do you not care about your mum or your wife or your daughter? So I've really very little truck with that.
Thanos, this conversation is recorded, right? Can we share this really widely? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And I'd love to open up to questions or comments from the audience. And now maybe I'll take a few so that we take a few questions if you take a mental note of what is asked, and then we can redistribute. So I'll take 3 questions. That lady, and then the lady with the yellow jacket.
Hi, Mel Eaton here. We've talked a lot about all of the things around environment and being aware of what people are going through. One of the key things where this hits the road is when we get to performance management. So at the end of a 6-month period or a year's period, and somebody has been suffering with menopause, they might have been taking a bit of extra time off, they might have had brain fog, not performing quite at the top level that they would normally do. How do we practically take that into consideration when comparing them to the rest of the talent that you're looking at?
Great question. Impact on performance management, the lady there. And in fact, I will make sure to take a 4th question from a man in the spirit of inclusion. So if one man can be prepared to ask a question.
Hi, it's Anne Fairweather from Hargreaves Lansdowne. It's been useful to hear all the best practice today. We have a menopause policy in place and the like, and done training and so on. I do think one of the tricky things with this issue, so there's a certain amount you can do as an employer to, put people in a better place and, make allowances, all the rest of it. But ultimately, there is a medical conversation that has to happen. And certainly my experience in discussing the perimenopause with my GP, having clued myself up on the subject, was I felt I was educating him. And I suggested what treatment I might like. So I think the comment around that Bupa menopause support, I think employers have to recognise that even once the awareness is raised and that people think, oh, maybe this is menopausal. And I obviously spent, a year with slightly annoying periods thinking, oh, maybe it's COVID, maybe it's this. And then it was like, maybe you are getting older, Anne. You have to face up to it eventually. But I think, the support that women need to perform at work at the level you're expected to perform at ultimately does involve some hormonal intervention. And that isn't a conversation you should have as a line manager, because that's a medical conversation and that's an individual choice issue as well. But if people are going to their GP and not getting that support, which, if you look at any of the menopause support groups, you can see is a fairly regular feature, they're going to meet a deadline, a dead end. And I think if you're raising awareness in the workplace but not doing anything practical to help, and allowing people to have a fan and do some flexible working is nice, but doesn't actually get to the root of the issue, then I think that's where, you create more problems. So I think just thinking about the medical support that an employer has in place, I think is incredibly important.
Thank you for that point. The lady with the yellow jacket.
Hello, everybody. I work here in Standard Chartered. Right? So I have a question about the research, actually. 2 points that are driving this question. Point one, when the MP mentioned she had the fibroid phase just before menopause, and when Tanuj mentioned that we run the risk of seeing some sort of forced early retirement, and when we're trying to fill up and hit our leadership targets. And how do you deepen this research around women that are sort of adjacent to menopause, premenopausal of some sort, especially with the intersection of sexual health and fertility issues? And there are lots of women, especially women of color, who face fibroid issues that are very challenging when it comes to fertility. And that anxiety around menopause is in a couple of years, I may never be able to have a child. How are you deepening the research around that? And what are your recommendations for employers as well?
Wonderful. And can I invite maybe a question from one of the men in the audience? The gentleman there, thank you.
I'm Saif Malik from Standard Chartered Bank. I think there's no question, just a comment, but I think the spirit of openness, I have to admit that before this awareness, my knowledge of menopause was zero. And I have a wife, I have a mother, so I think it is really important. And I think it's really critical to drive this awareness, along our organizations, but also in our own social circles. That's how a movement starts, for me. So thank you very much. It's really been eye-opening, and I think it's fantastic to learn about it, because at least I can be a partner and a support. As my partner will go through it also. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for your comments. So 3 questions. How does that truly impact as performance management approach? Acknowledgement that the medical world might not be as aware as we assume it might be. And how do we bring that consideration in your approach at work? And then I thought this point about looking at menopause as part of a continuum with issues preceding potentially that. I thought these are all very interesting points. I'm opening the floor for, if you want, Vicky.
Okay.
Vicky.
The performance management one, I think, is a fascinating question, actually, because, and it's a conversation that we're having quite actively at DLG at the moment, is about the expectations that we have, full stop, of our line managers have just gone up and up and up in terms of the things that they have to now manage in terms of the conversations they have with colleagues. So much more complicated than they used to be. And actually, are we really equipping them with the skills to be able to manage that? We don't believe we are. So we're going to do something about that this year. It's my number one priority, is to help our line managers to have better conversations, because we're making a point about driving a high performance culture, but you've got to be careful what that might drive if you don't explain it properly. And therefore equipping them to have the broadest range of conversations with that individual rather than a standard set of processes for everybody. And whether that be therefore, to your point, Mel, about, you know, somebody who's been experiencing the menopause, somebody who's been experiencing wider wellbeing issues, somebody who has parental responsibilities that they've had to leap into during that year. It's then coming down to the focus on outputs and the quality of outputs and less about time on the job or the inputs or the visibility or whatever that might look like. So I do think there's a massive piece of work for us, and I think it's probably across the sector actually, to do about equipping our line managers to be able to manage this.
Mel, can I just very quickly add? It's a great question, by the way. And the way we are dealing with it, and I think the people leader capability is a huge part of it, is just moving away from this idea of you set your objectives at the beginning of the year and get assessed at the end of the year to this idea of continuous performance management, which basically means every quarter you set your goals, which is a two-way conversation. You have regular check-ins. You moderate your goals up and down on the basis of what's happening in the world, you know, your ability to be able to deliver what you have, and make that a continuous conversation. Because one of the things we realize, not just in case of women going through menopause, but men going through long-term health issues or people having a challenge in their personal life, it could be anything, which does not flow into how traditional performance management systems have been set up. So this idea of moving away from once-a-year system to continuous feedback, underpinned by very strong people leader capability upgrade, I think is one way of addressing it, but I think it's a really real challenge.
Thank you. Maybe I turn to Tema and then Chris. Tema, do you want to comment on some of the questions?
Yeah, I just really support what you just said about performance management. I think there's something about how we teach people to have better conversations that's really important, which is not just about menopause, it's about just the wider context. It's really important in the hybrid way of working that we have conversations where we talk about how the person is in the round and not rely on those end of year conversations, exactly as you said, and really having regular catch-ups and check-ins that are much more focused on how the individual is showing up and things that we're noticing about them. I think when it comes to the medical conversation piece, what we discovered was that it's down to too much sort of chance about whether or not people can access the good GP and the good advice about menopause. And so we actively searched out with our healthcare provider, you know, other options that we could provide to everybody through the healthcare provision. And it comes to a point that I think is really important. We've got to make this not be about people feeling they've got to reach out for help. I think this is one of the challenges for the way in which this is sort of positioned for women. It's like there's something wrong, get help. Actually, if it's just part of the provision, it's just part of the practices and the policy, it's something that's inbuilt into our culture. I think it increases the accessibility of it and the success of getting those mechanisms to everybody. So I'd really encourage people to look at how they can provide that kind of support through their healthcare, because I think we've already seen a great take. We literally launched in January the 1st, and there's been a really positive upsurge as a result of having that benefit, that people are talking openly about accessing, and the great conversations they've had, the great support they've already got, and the follow-up that they will have in 12 weeks' time.
Thank you, Tema. Chris?
Yeah, I think the really good question is performance management and the crossover into health. I do think we're on a journey here, and very much aligned to the Standard Chartered's way of thinking. I mean, performance management of someone with a long-term health condition, you're in constant contact. Good managers stay in constant contact. I've been working very closely with someone who's, with conversations around her going through the menopause, and I'm very conscious, especially, and again, as everybody said, or as it has been said, this is personalised to everybody. There's not like kind of a standardised journey here. But this person's, their symptoms is a lot about anxiety. So when you're encouraging them to down tools a bit earlier, to take good care of themselves, to make sure they have a more balanced life, their anxiety means that actually it has the reverse effect. And think, in some ways, I feel as though they're not being able to cope, and therefore they kind of work even harder. So I think it's a very good question, and I think we're on a journey to, beyond talking about it, how we manage relative to performance management. I don't think the answer necessarily lies in greater process and procedure. I think it's about using the infrastructure that we have today as organisations and working them better. Relative to the health point, and I think I made the point, and it was made to me by the lady who was the real catalyst behind FD and HSBC becoming more menopause friendly over the last 2 or 3 years, is recognising that we're not doctors, recognising the bits that we can't do, and therefore getting experts involved. So we've engaged with an organisation called Henpicked, kind of to help us to prompt us to make us think differently, using Bupa. And I mean, last year, when there was some challenges around HRT supply, I engaged with our HR people to see if we could unlock that for some of our people through our private healthcare infrastructure within HSBC FD. Because I thought that would show that we really cared and we could do something practical for people who were sourcing HRT when it was actually in short supply. I kind of got the, I wouldn't say computer says no, but it was quite close to it at that point. And I think that's going to move on, because I think it will become a whole of person. We care about the whole person, not about the output or the outcome they can deliver to the organisation.
Thank you, Chris. And Claire, maybe...
Yeah, just picking up a few threads. I won't comment on the performance management piece. I think the medical conversation points that Anne raised is really important. So at the Commission, there's only 6 of us. We're tiny, so we can't afford private healthcare for our employees. So, we individuals rely on where they get their healthcare from, probably the NHS. But I think there's a real benefit in opening up this conversation, because I certainly feel from doing this research way more equipped to ask the questions of colleagues, of friends. I mentioned my netball mums, get a lot of information from the netball mums, tell you. It's really insightful. Such a wealth of expertise. So I think, although I can't solve that at the Commission, I can certainly, by having the conversation, I think that does help us move along. I think the point about women more generally is really well made. I always think there's 3 M's for women. It's, menstruation, maternity and menopause. And we don't often talk about all of that as a journey. And it's certainly something we're talking about more at the Commission in terms of female talent pipelines, not just for senior talent, but that when we did the research on the menopause, it started off as a conversation about senior women, but we were very clear that this needs to look at all women working in financial services at the very more, lower skill level all the way up to the very more senior level. And we are looking at doing more work on that female attraction and retention, and particularly around areas where we've got skills gaps and how we can support women to move into those areas and stay in work. But also older workers as well, because there's intersectionality of gender and age. And certainly work that Phoenix have done, and we've had conversations about it as well, Vicky, haven't we, about that certain age, your health is changing, whether you're a man or a woman. You've got kids that are growing up, you've got parents that are getting old, you've got other things going on, you're just generally more tired. Although we did find in our research that women are more tired than men say they are, but you're just tired, you're getting older. So what does that mean in terms of support for, from employers for work, etc.? So I think there's a few things that this we'll continue to debate and to look at in the broader piece of old age and gender in the workplace, and how those things come out, because menopause is not the only thing. There's a lot there to unpick.
Can I just add on that? Because it's a really good question. And I won't remember the statistics now, Katrina, you'll have to help. But as we did the research, we actually found very clear evidence of percentage of women in their 30s who had menopause early for a variety of, and there was an intersectionality place. So we didn't actively go to seek for that data in our research, because like I said, we didn't know what we wouldn't know, but some of that data came out quite clearly. I won't be able to quote the numbers, but, and when we launched the report 15 months ago, actually we heard from some younger females in financial services, including one from Treasury, if I remember, in 30s, who had for a variety of these reasons onset of early menopause and what it meant for them. So I agree, it's an uncharted territory, but if you look at the research, it does get into some of those points.
But I think the idea of looking at this through a continuum is really interesting. I just want to acknowledge the question from online attendees, which I think have been covered, but how do we tackle the challenge of private medical insurance not covering menopause, and how the insurance industry in particular can work to improve culture so women feel more comfortable sharing their menopause experience, but also prevent women over 50 leaving the industry and retaining that talent. I think we covered some of those points, but thank you to those people that have submitted a question. So we're going to have to wrap up. Unfortunately, it's been such a great conversation. If I maybe draw some comments to conclude, I think I like what you said about Tanuj, plenty of scope for positive unintended consequence of that conversation, which is not always the case. Often we have negative unintended consequence. So I really like that point. And I think there's plenty of scope for some humor as well, which was refreshing and a good thing to remember that it is an issue that is important, but that also can trigger some more humorous conversation. I think it's been revealing of women issues, but in fact it's revealing of much more broader societal issues and an opportunity, in my view, to make the hard-earned leadership of women in really sustaining that hard-earned leadership in a world that needs really plenty of it. So with those words,
Can I just give everyone some homework before you wrap up?
Okay.
So your homework is to mention to 3 different people today menopause, and if you're a man, mention it to 5 people. Because I just think we just need to keep talking about it. So that's everyone's homework today. Go and mention the menopause to 3 people or 5 people. Sorry.
No, this is all. I mean, before I hand over to Tanuj for final word, I just want to thank you, panelists, for your leadership, for your words, and as you say, Chris, words are cheap, but so for your actions. And please join me to thank our panelists.
The agenda says I have to do a wrap up and say thank you. So I'm not going to make this very long. I'm hoping some of you are going to stay back and have a bit of a mingle with each other over coffee. At Standard Chartered, our purpose is to drive commerce and prosperity through our unique diversity. And if you want to be, and we believe we are, a purpose-driven business, then there are stands you need to take in the world. And my strong view, and I know many of my colleagues who are here, is to say that when you take stands on topic like this, then it's not about competition, it's about cooperation. And what's the beauty about the piece of work, and I feel so passionately about it, is that we have been able to get our partners together to be part of the dialogue. We've got clients in the room today. We've got, our colleagues. We've got our partners. We've got representatives from other financial services institutions, many of whom we compete with every day. But the idea that when you take a stand on topics that are really important in the world, really important societal topics, there is a massive space for collaboration and cooperation, which is a much bigger space than competition. And to me, it's with that spirit that we got this research together. It was, with that spirit that we have had the conversation today. It's to learn from each other. And I walked away with so many interesting ideas that my team is going to get as a to-do list for this year. But look, thank you very much. I know we were a little bit nervous about the midday between 2 days of strike, but for many of you who've made the effort and for many, many more who have joined us virtually, I just wanted to say a massive thank you for participating in the dialogue.
We have a few more minutes, and Claire gave everyone their homework. Maybe I want to do a final round and to ask Vicky, what is your call to action to this audience online and in person, and then Tema and Nick as well?
So I think my call to action might be a bit more from the personal angle I talked about, is to talk to your family and friends. Get the conversation started, get the taboo out of the way that actually wasn't a taboo, but it was in my mind. And use your voice to start talking about it, making it, just an easier conversation.
Thank you, Vicky. Tema?
Well, you've both stolen both of mine. So I'm now sitting here thinking, what? So I was saying, the call to action, talk to your friends. I think maybe then if you take a professional lens on this, maybe go back and look at the support you're providing and see how accessible that really is to people. Is it hidden in the corner? Is it somewhere on the internet? How could you make it much more out there for people to see and know that it's there, and that you can have an open conversation in your business with your line managers about it?
Thank you, Tema. And Chris?
I think my provocation is from, as I say, listening to other people about something practical we can do. So that question I think you got, which is about why does medical health insurance not cover menopause? I know that's a question we've raised, and I think I want to go at that one again. And I think also the flexible working, again, thinking about how we can create an infrastructure around that, which is more embedded within the organisation.
Wonderful. Well, with that, I hope you stay for coffee, and thank you again to everyone.
Thank you.